Alright guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to do a video on a question that I've got from multiple people on YouTube, and I get a lot actually on the road, and that is what is the type of leader material that I use on my spinning gear, how long is are the leaders that I use, and also what type of knot am I using for my leaders. So that's just like any fishing question, that's kind of a loaded question because there's a lot of different variables, but I'm going to try to break down how I choose the right knot and the right leader length. That's probably what we're going to focus on the most, is the leader length. But let's start out with kind of breaking down my basic spinning rod setup. My spinning rod setup is composed of a Stunner S4000, a reel from Fitzgerald Fishing. I like the 4000 size. It just seems to be a really good bass size. It's got a wider spool, and I just feel more comfortable with it. And then I use it on a variety of different rods. This one right here is a Versa 610 medium heavy. This is actually one of my favorite spinning rods for a lot of different things, including the Ned rig. We've got right here the Z-Man TRD on there. And as far as the line that I spool on my spinning reels, we've got a 20-pound test Seaguar Smackdown in the flash green color. That is what I use for all of my spinning gear. I rarely will just tie a full fluorocarbon main line onto my spinning reels anymore. I'm usually just going to have that Smackdown as my primary. I can keep it the entire season, and then I tie on a leader to that. And speaking of the leader material, recently, Seaguar's come out with some smaller sizes of the Gold Label, and Gold Label is the only leader material that I use nowadays on my spinning reels. It's phenomenal, it's strong, but what's most important is that it's ultra thin per pound test. So I can actually upsize as far as strength while downsizing as far as line diameter. So Gold Label is where it's at. And as far as the knot that I use, I'm going to get a lot of comments, a lot of negative comments on this answer, but I use a uni to uni knot. That's the only knot that I use to connect my fluorocarbon to my braid. And the reason for the uni to uni is because it's just very reliable, and it's easy to tie. Those are very important things to me, especially under pressure, while I'm trying to save a lot of time on the water. Maybe sometimes my hands are cold. It's not the thinnest knot, I'll tell you that. It does go through guides, especially these microwave guides, a little bit harsh, but it doesn't seem to affect it much. I mean, the uni to uni is just a really strong knot. So that's my setup for spinning gear. So let's kind of dive into the leaders that I use. So on average, I'm going to be using 6 to 12 pound test, the Gold Label, as a leader material. Now, sometimes I'll go up to 15 if I'm like throwing a floating worm or something like that, around shallow brush, something where I really want to have that extra strength. Sometimes I'll go to 15, and the great thing about Gold Label, as we mentioned before, is the fact that it's really a small diameter. So 15 pound test feels and acts like 12 pound test in some other brands. So I can make that upgrade without really hindering the action of the bait or compromising the knot strength. So as far as the leader length, it's very hard to give a hard set answer on the overall leader length, because it changes with the different types of situations and the presentations that I'm fishing. So there's a few variables that I really try to pay attention to. Number one, visibility. Is the water clear? If the water is ultra clear, those fish are really picky, and I don't, I feel like those fish are line shy, I'm going to be using a longer leader. Sometimes I go up to 20-30 feet as far as a leader goes, if it's ultra clear water and those fish are really picky. And usually with my bottom bouncing techniques, if I'm using a bait that's really slow, maybe I'm fishing the Ned rig or something like that, I'm going to tend to use a longer leader. So usually I would say for my bottom bouncing techniques, real finesse techniques, I'm going to be using about a 20-foot leader. I want to get that flash green braid away from the fish's visibility, its line of sight, so I tend to use a longer leader. And then also a important thing to remember is the fact that braid is going to float. It's much more buoyant than fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon sinks. So with my bottom bouncing techniques, I want to make sure that I've got a lot of fluorocarbon to compensate for that floating braid. If you don't have a long leader, you know, maybe you've only got a 6-foot leader, you're going to have most of that line bowing and creating this big you know, arch in the water, because that braid is going to be floating. So I like to have as much of that sinking fluorocarbon as possible. But on the other side of the spectrum, you know, if I'm faced with a situation where I'm using a reaction style bait, you know, I mentioned the floating worm earlier, whether I'm using a floating worm or fishing a jerk bait, something like that, I'll loosen up on the leader a little bit as far as the length. Sometimes I'll go down to, you know, 4-foot leader. You know, in a situation where I'm trying to get a reaction bite, those fish really aren't paying attention to the line at all, I'm going to upsize to like 12 and 15 pound test and shorten up that leader. Now, because I just mentioned the 12 and 15 pound test, another reason that I would use a longer leader is if I'm using a lighter leader material. So if I'm going 6 or 8 pound test, you want to make sure that you've got extra stretch, that you've got a long enough leader to be able to have that extra stretch to cushion that hook set. Because if you're fishing with this braid and you've only got a 6-foot leader with 6 or 8 pound test, there's a lot of shock that shortened leader is going to have to deal with. The longer the leader, the more stretch, the more it's going to cushion the hook set. So that's a really important factor to consider as well. And that's why, you know, if I'm using a reaction bait and I'm using a shorter leader, I'm definitely going to upsize on the leader, use 12 and 15 pound test. Also, you know, one of the techniques that I really love, especially during the spring, is a wacky rig. You know, wacky rigging a bait like the Z-Man Zinkers is a great way to catch a lot of fish. In that situation, I'm going to kind of split the difference between a finesse technique with the 6 and 8 pound test and the reaction baits like the floating worms, the jerk baits, things like that. And I'm going to use a you know, kind of a moderate length leader. I'll probably go with that 6 to 8 foot leader, and the reason I'll use that shorter leader with the Wacky Rig is because I'm making, you know, real short casts to isolated cover and things like that. I don't think that the fish are necessarily that line shy and with a Wacky Rig if I'm fishing it around cover. And I also don't want that knot to go through the guides in the middle of the cast to slow it down. I want it to go through the guides at the very beginning of the cast. So that's just kind of a walkthrough, just kind of my thought process with leader material and the lengths that I use. Feel it out, pay attention to how stretch affects you know, lighter line, and also the visibility factor, and I think you guys are going to do just fine with the leaders. So hopefully that helps you guys. If you have any specific questions about the leaders, lengths, materials, knots, and things like that, feel free to comment below. Thank you guys for watching, and make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'll see you out in the water.